Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Armenian News Network Groong Week in Review for April 20th, 2025. Today, we're talking with Hrant Mikaelian, who is a multidisciplinary researcher in social sciences based in Yerevan. Welcome back, Hrant. Always great to talk with you.
Hi, glad to be here. Thank you.
Folks, we are recording this on late night Los Angeles time, April 21st, the day after Easter. So happy Easter to all those who celebrate. And in the Armenian Apostolic Church tradition, for 40 days, people greet each other with Christ is risen from the dead, blessed is the resurrection of Christ. In Armenian, that's Christos Haryavi Merelots, Orhnale Harusune Christosi. So we wish you a wonderful Easter. But now let's turn to geopolitics. Specifically, let's talk about Iran and the potential impending war in our region.
Yeah. So, Hrant, as the US and Iran resumed nuclear negotiations in Rome, and the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi called the talks positive, Israeli officials have stated that military action against Iran remains on the table. Specifically, Reuters reported that Israel is considering a so-called limited strike against Iranian targets that would require little US support. Now, given this atmosphere of negotiations between Iran and the United States, what are Israel's goals here, and what effect would such an attack have on US-Iranian negotiations?
Regarding Israeli goals, those are more or less obvious. And basically, I would point out the two. First is not to let Iran to become a nuclear power. And second, not to let Iran get out of the isolation, both diplomatic and political. Israel wants Iran to remain weak and to be isolated and not to be able to pursue its own politics in the Middle Eastern region. Technically, there could be two approaches on Israeli side towards Iran. One would be to try to improve relations and thus to decrease the extent of threat from Iranian side. Another would be to try to defeat Iran. And Israeli current cabinet, with its head Benjamin Netanyahu, decided to go the second path to try to destroy Iran or to defeat Iran, which I'm not sure is possible. Of course, they can bring a lot of trouble to Iran, but it does not mean that they can defeat Iran. That's a completely different story. Now, regarding the United States, I think this administration realizes that they cannot defeat Iran, or at least that they cannot deliver any good results with it, because Americans were able to defeat Iraq, for example. Of course, Iran and Iraq is not the same, but let's look at how devastating it was for the region and for American policy and so on. So I think they made a decision that they need this negotiation, and they will limit the ability of Israel to affect these negotiations, because 8 years ago, when Trump first time entered his office, he listened to Netanyahu and abandoned negotiations with Iran. And but by that time, there was already a big deal signed between Iran and other powers, 5+1. And now US will restart the negotiations to recreate some kind of a deal. I don't know what it will look like, but at the same time, Israel's ability to affect it will be limited. So it will be mostly Iran and US.
So from these complex negotiations that are going on, interestingly, Russia has emerged as a possible mediator between the two countries, in the sense that it might end up playing a role in holding onto Iran's highly enriched nuclear stockpiles. At the same time, the US-Russia talks have taken a fairly interesting new dynamic, with the possibility of US recognition of Crimea as a part of Russian sovereign territory. What are your thoughts about the US-Russia discussions, which at this point encompass far more than just Ukraine, apparently?
Well, first of all, let's look at paradigm here, at US approach here. First, the US for decades did not recognize that there is any other power which is not to say equivalent, but at least strong enough to that they need to deal with it. They thought either every country should obey or they can destroy it. And by the time of Biden administration, US has lost its ability to pursue its own agenda without any consequences and to reach the results they wanted if they clash with big power. That includes Russia, that includes China, and not only. So Trump's administration came with very high ambitions, but they are much more flexible with it. So first they tried to reach their goals. Then they found out that they are not able to do it, and now they are trying to engage with Russia in a number of talks on Arctics, on Middle East, on Ukraine, and so on. So they found out that they need Russia, and they can end the conflict with Russia. At least that's what they believe in, and they are trying to engage Russia because the world order, which is based only on US plus Europe plus Japan, is not stable enough. Maybe with Russia, they can stabilize it for some time. And by the way, I think they will need to engage more and more countries because, you know, the share of the West in the global economy is decreasing. And by the way, share of Russia in the global economy is not growing either. So at some point, they will need to be more and more inclusive. And that's what they realize now. Now, regarding the current affairs, first, with Iran, how do you deal with Iran? Basically, there are two countries which you can involve in these talks, either Russia or China. Russia is now becoming a strategic ally of Iran. They have signed an agreement on January 17, 3 days before Trump came into office. And Iran is a major economic partner of China. So you have to deal with one of those. And since US is seeking a new conflict with China because they consider it a major key competitor, that's why they have to deal with Russia. Of course, you can involve European Union as well, because European Union is not that anti-Iran minded as US was and as Israelis. And Iran also seeks a negotiation with European countries as well. But still, European countries do not have a good enough relations with Iran as Russia does. So they decided to try to use a Russian mediation, but of course they will try to utilize all possible tools, including Israeli threat, including European Union, including Russians, and so on.
How do you think a Russian role in the US-Iran negotiations affect its influence in the South Caucasus, specifically in the Armenia-Azerbaijan dynamic?
I think it will affect to the major extent. Previously, the American policy was the following. They should take the whole region of the South Caucasus, and at some point, maybe in very far future, but at some point, the South Caucasus should become part of the NATO. But since US ability to control this region was limited, basically this policy meant that the region is given to Turkey. And this policy basically was the main agenda during the last 30 years. And this made Turkey stronger than ever. And now they are kind of reviewing this policy. First, US does not want to compete with Russia in the post-Soviet space. I mean, the current administration. And they are trying to abandon Ukraine. Of course, there is a strong resistance there, but still, this is obvious that this is their policy. And second, they are trying to not abandon Middle East, but to improve situation in the Middle East because it's hardened with many conflicts. So US will not compete with Russia in the South Caucasus under this administration. And I'm not sure that the next administration will change anything if the president changes. So I think US abandons South Caucasus, and EU will not be able to keep Western influence on the same level as it was. So Russia will gain a momentum. At least Russia and Turkey will compete, let's say, fairly, because Turkey will not be backed up by the US and EU, or backed up by US. So at this time, Russia's influence will grow in the South Caucasus, and this is what we should be prepared for. especially after the end of the Ukraine war.
Hrant, do you think that this is going to shift Russia's perspective regarding Azerbaijani demands for extra-territorial corridors through Armenia?
I think it can, but in order to ensure that Russia's perspective is shifting towards what would be beneficial for Armenia, we need to have more profound policy on that matter. Because Russia is also making its policy based on negotiation with partners. If Armenia is not there, the Azerbaijani voice will be heard, Armenian voice will not be heard. That's, by the way, the major problem of Armenian foreign politics in last 5 to 7 years, because Armenians' voice is not heard, and it's obvious both in Moscow, in Washington, and in Brussels. In Brussels, of course, you can see Pashinyan frequently visiting, but he is not coming with his own agenda. On the contrary, he is coming to ask what agenda he should have. So we should have both our perspective and diplomatic activity.
Mm.
Okay, I want to stay on this region for one more question. On April 28th, that's next Monday, Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian is going to take a 120-person strong delegation to Baku for direct discussions on all of the aspects of relations between the two countries. So it's expected that the issue of Azerbaijan's connectivity to Nakhichevan is also going to be discussed. Regarding this issue, last week, when the Slovenian Foreign Minister Tanja Fajon was in Yerevan, she expressed support for Pashinyan's Crossroads of Peace project. But when she went to Baku, Azerbaijan's Foreign Minister Bayramov said that while Azerbaijan was building connectivity with Nakhichevan through Iran, Azerbaijan was going to continue demanding that Armenia will accede to its demands for unlimited, uncontrolled, and unfettered access through Armenian territory. So as far as Iran's red lines go about the Iran-Armenian border, are you concerned about these talks in Baku? And what do you expect these bilateral conversations or discussions to be primarily about?
Well, I think there is some place to be concerned because, first of all, let's not forget, Pezeshkian himself is Azerbaijani, and he was very friendly towards Turkey and Azerbaijan through his political career. So I would not exclude this factor out of the overall context. But at the same time, of course, Iran is now threatened with a possible Israeli and American strike, and then Iran is threatened with Turkish and Azerbaijani alliance, and now Iran has to keep 150,000 its soldiers on the northern border with Turkey and Azerbaijan, basically. And by the way, this presence, military presence there, was much weaker until 2020 war, when Azerbaijan captured the border with Iran on the Artsakh side. So now Iran feels threatened, and this is their way to counteract, to prevent Azerbaijan engaging in anti-Iranian coalition. That's major goal of Iran. But at the same time, of course, they see that the level of relations with Azerbaijan is very low, and basically Azerbaijan is an anti-Iranian state and built on an anti-Iranian paradigm since the Pan-Turkism spread in Baku in 1910s to 1920s. So Iran is trying to, somehow weaken this paradigm and somehow improve its positions in Baku. Especially, I think they will discuss cultural and religious affairs, because nominally Azerbaijan is a Shia country, but basically Turkey is spreading Sunnism there, and very successfully. So I think that will be also a matter of negotiations. But of course, if Armenia does not have a similar discussion with Iran on various affairs involving many fields, that might be problematic, especially if Azerbaijan will find a way to convince Iran that it will not be hurt from so-called Zangezur corridor, or that it might participate somehow. So I think they might try to convince Pezeshkian. Of course, they will not be able to convince the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, but they are able to convince Pashinyan. So this is what might be worrying.
Okay, well, let's turn our attention back to the Vatican briefly. Sadly, Pope Francis passed away yesterday, and we offer our heartfelt condolences on this occasion. This is a moment of sorrow for Catholics worldwide, including many in the Armenian community. However, I think we would be remiss if we didn't discuss the recent controversy involving the Vatican's ties to the Aliyev regime. So, while our remarks on this topic may be critical, they come from a place of respect, and the Catholic Church is a sister church to the Armenian Apostolic Church, and our comments do not come from a place of antagonism. So, just as a disclaimer. Now, many Armenians also warmly remember when Pope Francis visited Armenia in 2016, and the visit was titled A Visit to the First Christian Country. And of course, the Pope's recent efforts to bring light to the issue of Gaza, the genocide in Gaza, are also well remembered, although many criticize him for not actually doing more and going to the place, or so. Basically, I think that there was some criticism on that aspect as well. But here's the part where Armenians, are really hurt. In the final weeks of Pope Francis's life, the Vatican hosted an event that many Armenians would categorize as a deep betrayal. There was a conference titled Christianity in Azerbaijan, History and Modernity, held at the Pontifical Gregorian University and backed by Azerbaijan's authoritarian regime. And it promoted a propaganda narrative erasing the Armenian Christian legacy of Artsakh, or Nagorno-Karabakh. No Armenian scholars or those that would represent genuinely critical views were present. The event was endorsed by senior Vatican officials, despite Azerbaijan's 2023 ethnic cleansing of Christian Armenians, all of them from Artsakh. Basically, there is not a single Armenian left, almost. And on a separate note, just days later, Azerbaijan hosted an event in Warsaw, Poland, titled the Western Azerbaijani Community Exhibit or something like that. And in that event also, there was a falsification claiming Armenian churches and claiming all of Armenia. If you know the concept of Western Azerbaijan, that's what it means. So it's beyond question that these actions are part of a global state-sponsored campaign to rewrite history and whitewash war crimes. But now they're finding cover under the Vatican roof. And this isn't new because Pope Francis received Ilham Aliyev and his wife shortly before the 2020 war. Probably Aliyev knew what he was going to do later that year, and this was part of their effort, their PR effort. And then the Vatican also bestowed the highest honor they can bestow on a civilian or a layperson to Aliyev's wife, some kind of magnanimous, whatever, honor. Azerbaijan has a very long record of repression against Armenians and Christians in the region. But Vatican institutions have accepted donations, they have partnered on restoration projects, and given legitimacy to Baku's regime. Meanwhile, it's very funny that the Gregorian University claims that it merely rented a room for the April event, despite the stage being decorated with the flags of the Vatican and many high-ranking church officials being present at the event. For many Armenians, and including myself, the memory of the Pope, Pope Francis, will be that picture with the butcher, Ilham Aliyev, and his butcher wife on his both sides. And it is not a flattering memory to have, but unfortunately, we have to say the truth. So, Hrant, we're going to do a detailed podcast on this topic with some scholars and experts on this area. But I wanted to understand from your perspective, how is it possible that the Vatican, knowing full well what happened in Artsakh, would allow its institutions to become basically tools of the Azerbaijani state propaganda?
First of all, I want to say that I'm not a good expert on that. So I can only share some basic ideas based on my discussions with experts on Vatican matter. So first, of course, it's a corruption, and we see these examples of such corruption by Azerbaijan in very many cases. But at the same time, we see this corruption does not work everywhere to the same extent. For example, of course, this corruption works in Poland, but it should not have worked in Vatican. And why Poland, for example? Because Poland also has its plans in the South Caucasus, which were always basically anti-Armenian, because Poland would like to push anti-Russian policy, and anti-Russian policy would imply weakening Armenia and relying both on Georgia and Azerbaijan and isolating Armenia. That's unfortunate reality, but that's what it is. Now, regarding the Vatican policy, it's not only just pure corruption, but it's also an overall approach by Vatican towards Armenian Church, which is basically to cannibalize it. Again, I might be mistaken, I might be wrong, but that's my that's my opinion on that. So the idea is that in any case, the Middle East is losing Christianity, but if Vatican will be able to cannibalize what has remained afterwards, Vatican will get stronger. So it can both benefit from Azerbaijani corruption and the remains of Armenian Church. And I think we can see such approach by Vatican in different regions of the world. And this is not the exclusion, I think, because Vatican did not react to anti-Armenian actions by Jerusalem police when they are trying to capture part of the Armenian quarter. And then we see this approach towards Artsakh. And I was told that there are many such cases in Italy itself. They are trying to, assimilate the Kittarist order and so on. So basically, I think Vatican's approach towards Armenian Church is trying to cannibalize the remains of it if it will be, let's say, defeated on its homeland. And this is why I think Vatican at this stage is not a friend of Armenia. And it's why Pope Francis, for example, came to Armenia 10 years ago and tried to improve relations, because basically he was a liberal pope, and a liberal pope would imply that he is not very hard-lined pope, and he was trying to decrease these tensions and not push this agenda to a very big extent, this cannibalizing agenda to a very big extent. And after he got weaker and weaker, because of his health condition, he was less and less able to affect this policy. That's my opinion, and I think as of this time we should be very careful about Vatican, but also it's also because of absence of Armenian political leadership.
That was where I was going
And
to get to.
Yeah.
That was, basically, I
Yeah.
think that when there is no state policy, how does I haven't seen the Armenian government react to this. I'm pretty sure there hasn't been any reaction.
I haven't heard anything. I haven't read
Yeah.
anything.
So how does
Yeah,
the
but-
Armenian government's lack of a policy, or in fact a policy that is antithetic to Armenian Church, affect this, other actors such as the government of Poland or the Vatican itself?
Yeah, of course, everyone knows. Everyone, let's not be mistaken here. Everyone knows that Armenian government is anti-church, anti-Armenian Apostolic Church, and anti-Artsakh, and basically Armenian government favors all these policies, or at least is neutral towards it, which is enough. So that gives everybody a room to be, let's say, even more anti-Armenians than they would be. But at the same time, there is a bit different story with Vatican compared to, let's say, government of Poland, because Vatican represents a church which is its moral imperative. It's not only political goal, but it's also a moral politics. And it's not that I can, therefore I will do, which was a main slogan of American policy last 250 years, right? But for Vatican, it should be something different, I think. But it was not this time, and basically never was, which also shows the extent of moral imperative in Vatican policies. But again, we have seen Armenian genocide recognition by Vatican 10 years ago, and now we see the more Pope Francis was weakening, the more we see this approach. So, of course, Armenian policy towards Vatican 10 years ago was completely different. With previous government and Ambassador Mikaelian were trying to pursue Armenian agenda there, and of course to some extent the Vatican agenda here, but it was somehow mutual policy, mutual beneficial policy. But again, what I said of Vatican's policy, I think this is a long-term policy. I will bring another example, which is very deep-rooted historically, but I don't think it's outdated case because Vatican has very good memory. Ferrara-Florentine unity of 1439 to 41. There was a big summit, church summit, which effectively had cannibalized several Eastern churches, and Armenian Church escaped through moving its main see from Cilicia back to Echmiadzin, which took place in 1444. So after they have signed the unity with Vatican, which effectively made Armenian Church subject of Vatican policy, they realized that they have somehow escaped and move towards Echmiadzin was a way to escape. So I think the Vatican policy towards Eastern Christians did not change for very many centuries. And it refers not only towards Armenian Church, but also towards the Orthodox Church.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think to have deeper insight, to have better understanding, you will have a discussion with proper experts on Vatican and on church politics.
Yeah, and just to complete the topic, the Armenian Apostolic Church has condemned this conference, and also a group of 350 scientists have written a letter or a statement condemning this event and also demanding that the cardinals involved, there are a couple names, I won't read them, but they be declared persona non grata in Armenian churches. I think this issue requires more attention, and we will do that in future shows. But thank you for your answers on this, Hrant.
And when you were talking about moral politics, let's go to the United States for a moment, because after months of review, the US Export-Import Bank, the EXIM Bank, has approved a $339 million loan to support Azerbaijan's Silkway Airlines to purchase Boeing airplanes. This is despite the fact that the airline is linked directly to Aliyev and to arms transport. We read this by the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, the OCCRP, as well as the ANCA, the Armenian National Committee of America, which has called on the Trump organization, on the Trump administration, to stop the sale of the planes to Aliyev's corrupt regime. One more thing, this is all despite the fact that the US State Department vowed no business as usual, as they said, with Azerbaijan after the September 2023 ethnic cleansing of Armenians from their homeland in Nagorno-Karabakh. Hrant, Silkway is the airline transporting weapons from countries like Turkey and Israel to Azerbaijan. And Azerbaijan is one of the world's biggest arms importers. This is a country of 8 to 10 million people that is one of the largest importers of weaponry. And obviously the US knows this, right?
And obviously the US knows who that weaponry is going to be used against as well.
Well, that is also an interesting question, Hovik. Since the U.S. claims to support peace in the South Caucasus, what is the game that they're playing here, Hrant?
First of all, we can remember that there was a 907th amendment which abandoned military support to Azerbaijan after its aggression in 90s. But since 2000s, every American president would stop effect of this amendment and would support Azerbaijan. Especially we have seen such policy in late Obama and Trump period, Trump first term. And we have seen rather significant military aid to Azerbaijan in 2018, for example, in 2019, which all in all has contributed to 2020 aggression by Azerbaijan. And then after 2023, there was somehow change in policy, because first of all, Biden was, let's say, more skeptical towards Turkey and towards its regional ambitions. So there was an overall institutional context in which US is supporting South Caucasus move towards NATO, and Turkey was playing a crucial role there. But at the same time, Biden was skeptical towards Turkey, and not only Biden himself, Democratic Party usually is, let's say, a bit more skeptical towards Turkey and a bit more pro-Armenian, which is why most of Armenian lobby is concentrated in Democratic Party. After change in government and after Trump administration came into power, we are seeing a change here as well. First change was not because of the Trump administration, but because of Aliyev's activity, because he tried to find a way towards Washington. And as far as I'm aware, last 3 months, he was extremely active to get his way to get in touch with Trump. And on the first stages, Trump was not interested at all. But then with, again, use of corruption within Trump administration and within, Jewish community, there were letters of 300 rabbins and some propaganda articles in Jerusalem Post and some other newspapers. So basically through Israel, Azerbaijan found its way towards new administration. And, this administration is much more prone to listen to Israeli lobby. And I think Israeli lobby was effective to bring Azerbaijan back to agenda with Washington. And I think as of now, Azerbaijan has effectively overcome the consequences of 2023. On one hand, we have seen how Tulsi Gabbard or Robert Kennedy or even Trump himself were condemning ethnic cleansing of Armenians. But on another hand, we see that this approach is not institutionalized. And either Armenian lobby in United States should do it, or Armenian government, basically the second. But again, we see that they are letting Azerbaijan to do whatever it wants. And Washington is not an exclusion. That's what we see.
I want to pick up on that question that you brought up, Hovik, as to who these arms are going to be used against. Are they going to be used against Armenia, or are they going to be used against Iran? Because,
Which is not mutually exclusive.
Well, yeah, but we are, of course, very worried about the heavy militarization of Azerbaijan with the expansion of Silkway. But are these weapons, are so much weaponry being acquired so that they can defeat Armenia, which is almost demilitarized at this point in time? Or are we just roadkill on the path to bigger wars being planned in the region?
Well, of course, Azerbaijan is selling its strategic position between Russia and Iran, and especially its position towards Iran, especially given that a big portion of northern Iran is populated by ethnic Azerbaijanis, where both Azerbaijan and Turkey have their own security and surveillance services presence. So Azerbaijan is important if you are trying to deal with Iran and if you might have war with Iran. So this was one of the major selling points of Azerbaijani foreign politics in the last 30 years. And of course, Azerbaijan is utilizing its role now as well. At the same time, Azerbaijan itself would like to avoid the war with Iran. And what would be ideal scenario for Azerbaijan? For Azerbaijan, the ideal scenario would be that Iran is defeated by Israel and United States. And during this defeat, in the last day, Azerbaijan comes and takes the northern Iran. That's obviously their most favored situation. That's why they would support any anti-government movement in Iran. But at the same time, they were reluctant to participate in any direct military aggression against Iran, because Iran might be not strong enough to counteract the Washington, but it is strong enough definitely to counteract Baku. So Baku would like to bring Iran to collapse, but not itself, but within major coalition where Baku would, join in the end. So as of this time, I think Azerbaijan would not provide its territory for anti-Iranian aggression, but at the same time, it would provide its territory for anti-Iranian surveillance, let's say. And so that's a bit weaker role than would be welcomed by Israel, but that's what they have.
All right, well, let's go into internal Armenian politics. On April 16, the newly elected Avakhani, which is the Council of Elders or the City Council in Gyumri, held their first meeting. So, despite winning 37% of the vote, civil contract was not able to achieve an absolute majority, which means that the four remaining parties that won seats in the election, which are all opposition, were able to agree on their candidate for mayor, Hrant Mikaelian, former mayor of Gyumri. But it's important to note, I don't think this is a coalition, but just an agreement on the mayor. So the results in Gyumri and Parakar are yet another signal of growing dissatisfaction, I believe, with this ruling civil contract party. Hrant, how serious of a blow do you think this is to civil contract?
I think this is a serious defeat because let's review this election from the scratch. I think the election should have been held in October 2026, so after the national election, which should take place in June 2026, but they decided to have it in 2025. I think this election would have been designed as a testing election before the parliamentary elections and also before the constitutional referendum, which this government wants to help to bring Azerbaijani constitution to the table in Armenia. Now, the problem is that they knew they have troubles, and they were trying to improve the situation with so-called EU referendum or Yerakwe, which is perceived as, let's say, more likely to have a positive outcome. Lately, in the last year and in the beginning of this year, they have seen that this might become a trouble, not only because of transformation in public opinion in Armenia, but also the worldwide. We can look at the US election, where the so-called favorite has failed. Then we can look at Romanian situation, and then the Moldovan elections, which were very significant, I think, for the perceptions of Pashinyan government, and then the Georgian election, where, let's say, pro-EU parties have failed. So as of now, they have observed that anti-EU and anti-globalist and anti-Western, well, let's say at least anti-globalist powers are on the rise. And this makes them more and more skeptical of elections. You can remember how they were discussing the possibility of the next election in 2025, but after all these elections, they have decided not to try it beforehand, and that is why I think they are now having these elections in Gyumri. Now, this election was illegal from the beginning. Why? Because Gyumri had a mayor, Samvel Balasanyan, and he had his own party, so-called Balasanyan Dashing, which was formed in mid-2010s, yet during previous government, but it was not directly representing any of major opposition parties like Republican Party or the Armenian bloc by Kocharan. No, it was a separate party, which I would say would be considered a local opposition party. And since 2021 until 2023, this bloc, Balasanyan bloc, was cooperating with the government. So we can say that this bloc became opposition since 2023. And since then, the government, the central government, started pushing this bloc, started opening, some criminal cases against it. And by October 2024, the pressure was so high that they could not withstand. They were jailing direct relatives of the mayor of Gyumri. So he has resigned, and so did all his bloc. This bloc had 14 places out of 33 seats in the whole Gyumri City Council. 14 places is basically the same as the civil contract has right now after this election in the Gyumri City Council. But they have destroyed the major party of Gyumri, which has ruled the city the last 8 years. And by destroying the major party, they thought opposition will not be able to consolidate and they will have easy win. That's what their approach was. And on the first stage of pre-election campaign, it seemed that they might win based on the opinion polls, because there was no one who seemed to have enough public support to counteract. But since the government has started quickly and opposition has started later, by the end of campaign, opposition had gotten a momentum. And we have seen that there was no major player among the opposition, but there were 4 major players, or at least the 2 plus 2, where 2 were, let's say, stronger, 2 were weaker, but strong enough to overpass the barrier.
Yeah.
One subject did not overpass the barrier. There was so-called Euro coalition in Gyumri, which would be supportive of Pashinyan's candidate, and they were expecting to create a coalition with this Euro alliance in Gyumri, but they did not overpass the election barrier.
Can that be read as a signal about public support for this Euro referendum as well? Because their main selling point of this Euro coalition was that we were going to join the EU, right? And they didn't even get enough votes to get like 1 seat on the council.
I think yes. I think we have been observing the following trends here. First, in reality, the accession to the EU is not on the table, and everyone knows it. Second, Armenia not only has very weak chances, but also it's not an Armenian agenda as well. If we look at opinion polls in Armenia, we can see that majority of the population is concerned of security situation of Armenia. Minority is concerned of economic situation. But there is literally no one who thinks that the major issue of Armenia that it's not in the EU. So it's a kind of artificial political agenda, which is not going from the bottom. Well, obviously it comes from the top, from the government, from these pro-Western parties. But at the same time, we have seen some other trends. For example, lately, there have been some polls which show the decrease of potential support towards EU in Armenia, and which is caused, in my view, that by the fact that Pashinyan himself started propagating EU accession and referendum on EU membership. And everything which Pashinyan touches becomes unpopular in Armenia. Not immediately, but gradually it will become. And also, according to the Caucasus Barometer survey, which was held in late 2024, we could observe that Euro pessimism, let's say, or Euro skepticism in Armenia has grown stronger than ever since 2008, since when they have these opinion polls. And yet majority is going to support EU membership if the referendum is held, but minority gets bigger and bigger, and at some point it might overpass the pro-European support.
All right, let's go to the last topic, and it's not unfortunately, it's not another pleasant, it's yet another unpleasant topic. Pashinyan escalated his campaign to erase Artsakh from Armenia's political life, not just disowning Artsakh, but blaming its people for their own displacement. Multiple politicians and rights defenders accused the government of inciting hatred towards Artsakh refugees. And just to sort of summarize what happened, Pashinyan called the Qarabağ movement a threat to Armenia's sovereignty, claiming it's driven by foreign actors. Mirzoyan stepped in to say that Armenia bears no responsibility for Artsakh Armenians or any of the rights that they have, since no Armenians live in Artsakh anymore. And he also cited that Armenians signed that dissolution decree, which was done under duress, by the way. Then protests broke out in Yerevan against hate speech and withdrawal of support for refugees, because not only are these people now homeless, but their support is dwindling. The Armenian government is cutting that back, and many say it's a deliberate policy to force these people to move out and basically emigrate out of Armenia. So MP, Member of Parliament, Hrant Mikaelian, accused Artsakhs of not fighting in 2023. He in fact said, only like a few people died, despite like hundreds of people dying. And if you extrapolate that to and compare it with the 2020 war, that was probably the highest number of deaths in a single day of fighting. If you compare it with the 44-day war. So again, these remarks were condemned, but also media linked by Sukyasyan went further. His media or media associated with him was spreading outright, incitement for violence, saying that Artsakh should be leveled to the ground. They're not worthy the bullets to kill them. I'm sorry to repeat all these vile statements, but this is what is being heard on YouTube channels and websites that are associated with civil contract members. So, what is the so-called problem that this Pashinyan regime is trying to solve with this fomenting of hatred against Artsakh?
First of all, regarding Khachatur Sukyasyan, yeah, he is one of the main oligarchs in Armenia. Today, he is the main oligarch who earned most of the re-exporting money during last Russia-Ukraine war. Yet he is strongly anti-Russian, but makes his money in Russia as well. Now, going back to his agenda, from 90s and on, his agenda was to open the border with Turkey and make money on that. And Turks have said that it's Artsakh, which does not let them to do what they want. So give up on Artsakh, and we will open our market to you, to him and many oligarchs like him. So he decided he needs to destroy Artsakh in order to get to Turkish market. And that's what he has been doing lately. Basically, Pashinyan had the same approach. He was pursuing anti-Artsakh position since 90s, and he was having this propaganda for a very long period of time, until maybe 2014.
Yeah, before you get to Pashinyan, I also want to mention that essentially you said that he's the main oligarch in the civil contract regime, and he is bankrolling many of the livelihoods of all these like MPs. For instance, many MPs whose first, it seems if you read their resume, it's like, I was born, started walking, and then became a member of parliament. Those are the next steps, and all of them got like loans for mortgage loans for their houses as soon as they entered the Armenian parliament. And all of these loans are given by the bank associated with this member of parliament, Khachatur Sukyasyan. So there's evidence that he is definitely bankrolling the entire civil contract operation and keeping the cohesion, because all of these geniuses that are in the parliament now with these loans are going to be finding very difficult to get a job to pay for them if they ever decide to leave. But yeah, please go on. I just wanted to make sure people know that.
Yeah, so Pashinyan changed his approach towards Artsakh since 2014, when he began his rally towards revolution in Armenia, and he was, let's say, pro-Artsakhi until 2020, and then he again opened his face. So basically, they have two goals now. One is to please Turkey and Azerbaijan, and another is to avoid criticism on their defeat in the war and the loss of Artsakh in 2020 to 2023. They are trying to convince people that Artsakh was not only not good, but was bad, and that abandoning Artsakh is not bad but good. So that's what their policy is. Basically, anti-Artsakhi propaganda would always be found on Haykakan Zhamanak newspaper pages since 90s. So there is nothing new, And what specific goals do they have? First, Artsakhi refugees are, of course, to some extent, a burden on social situation in Armenia. So by abandoning them, they are trying to free some space for themselves and for economic growth and so on. That's first. Second, they want to decrease the social pressure because so many refugees might be a problem. Third, again, to avoid criticism, and they are to a very high extent afraid of Artsakhs rising against the government. And to a very big extent, this propaganda was aimed to prevent Artsakhs rising against the government. And by the way, during the last year movement, they have started through the social services network, they have started calling every Artsakh who is receiving social support from the government to not participate in the protest action. Otherwise, they will lose the government support. And now they are trying to do the same, but since they are abandoning the social security to Artsakh, now it's less and less effective, and we have seen how Artsakh started mobilizing. Unfortunately, now I think they should have done from the beginning. So this is another goal, and overall they are trying to forget and overpass the Artsakh page in Armenian history, as they say. But obviously they will not succeed here. But they will be able to poison some souls. Maybe some 10% of population will believe their propaganda and will become victims of it and will get engaged in conflicts with Artsakh and with the next Armenian government, which will be, of course, pushing completely different goals and approaches.
And what's funny is for like a very mild speech 2 years ago, Armen Grigoryan, a movie producer, who questioned the patriotism of Gyumri Armenians or something like that, you know? He was jailed for 2 months and he died in the courtroom. Meanwhile, apparently this Armenian government cannot find, you know, who's spreading all of this hatred against Artsakhs and the media, you know, they can't figure out who owns all this media that are publishing all these stories against Artsakhs. You know, the right to return. I mean, it's a human right that is encoded in international laws, and so are other human rights that the Artsakhs have been deprived of. So if the Armenian government is not supporting the Artsakh people, the people from Artsakh, then who will? You know, who can they turn to?
Well, Armenian government is trying to work as foreign government towards Armenians. It's just a government. That's why they have renamed everything which is national towards state. So now we don't have, let's say, national opera, we have state opera. We don't have national museum, we have state museum. So national refers to Armenian, while state might be purely neutral. So neutral, well, today it's Armenian state, tomorrow it's Azerbaijani state. It's just a state institution. So it's about institution, and they are trying to convince people to be patriots of the state, which means be patriot of the officials or maybe of public servants. That's what they are trying to convince. Of course, this will not work in long term, but in short term, they are trying to, somehow play with this card. Now, regarding the goal, I think the goal is to completely remove any ideological and anything which remains of Armenian in the governance of Armenia and in the foreign political agenda of Armenia.
All right. Well, let's wrap up our topics here at this point. Let me ask each of you if there's something on your mind that you want to share with our listeners. Hovik, let's go first.
Yeah, so this week will be the anniversary of the Armenian genocide commemorations, and I'm pretty sure that the Armenian government will do extra work this year to not alienate Turkey and not do anything to make any statements that would otherwise, you know, alienate Aliyev and Erdogan. But you know, if you are in Armenia, if you are in Yerevan, then on April 23rd, the night before, on the eve of April 24th, the ARF organizes a Jaheroviert, it's called in Armenian, I guess torchlight procession. They will walk to Tizanagabert from I believe from the Republic Square in Armenia. So you're welcome to attend that event. It's a very, I think it's going to be pretty big this year, given the amount of hate and poison spewed by this government.
Hovik, does the government media cover the procession?
Well, I'm sure they might do some token coverage, but you can't compare the coverage even in previous years after 2020. You can't compare that coverage with the coverage that Armenian media gave to April 24th before Pashinyan came to power.
Interesting.
I'm pretty sure that essentially the goal of the Armenian government is to not only remove Artsakh or remove the cause of Artsakh, but also the Armenian genocide, which is being dictated from Turkey.
Yeah. Hrant, is something on your mind you'd like to share?
No, I think I just agree with what Hovik said. This what he said is already clearly stated goal. It's not even our guess. That's what they say officially. And so as of this time, I think to some extent, the diaspora and civil society should take its role for some time until we get the proper government, let's say.
Okay. Thank you, Hrant, for joining us. Let's be done for today.
Thank
Always
you,
enjoy
Asbed.
talking
Thank you,
with you.
Hovik.
Thank you, Ranjan.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that was our Week in Review show, recorded on April 22nd, actually, 2025. We've been talking with Hrant Mikaelian, who is a political analyst and multidisciplinary researcher in social sciences based in Yerevan. He's also a senior researcher at the Caucasus Institute. Hrant is a co-founder of the Armenian Project. For more information on all of us, me, Hovik, Hrant, any participant in the episode, check out the show notes, which also has a whole bunch of the links that we are referencing in this show. For example, the Reuters article that we referred to, a whole bunch of other links. They're all in podcasts.groong.org/episode number.
And folks, do your thing, like, share, comment. You know what to do, so I'm not going to be long about this, but it really helps us with our engagement.
Absolutely. I'm Asbed Bedrossian in Los Angeles.
And I'm Hovik Manucharyan, currently traveling, not in Yerevan, Armenia.
So please find us on social media and follow us everywhere you get your Armenian news. We'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.